all that, right? People did. It affected the SBDC a little bit just because of that, but it affected our Management Development Institute significantly. Our Management Development Institute does training and certificate type program for larger businesses. And those people stopped spending money on training.
When I worked for the state of Missouri, they turned off the water fountains.
Oh my gosh.
They turned off every other light.
Well, we did that at the university too. I forgot about that actually. They turned down the fountains.
They had all the elevators stop except for one. There was 6 in the Freeman building.
That's
and
good.
So anyway, I was just like, we were like, every other light. What do you
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was maybe before that. That was in 2006.
There was a little blip in 6, wasn't there? Yeah, that's what I remember.
I had an awful debt with the war. And we had
Yeah.
a 4-year freeze on pay.
Yeah, we had a lot. We didn't receive raises for about 4 years. Long time.
You know, I didn't get an increase this year or last year, but all my health insurance.
Yeah, because they're indexing now on the consumer price index, and it's not going up. That's why. I know. Anyway, let's see what was going on here. So we're going to calculate the difference between the 2 years, which we had. Now we see it, that we see the math. We see there was an $80,000 increase in sales between year 1 and year 2, which was a 20% increase, which is a lot. If you guys do a 20% increase this year, you will have a party, right? Yes, exactly. I would too. It doesn't, until you start putting the math to it, it's like, it doesn't look that grand, but it is. So then years 3 to years 2, there was a 17% increase. It's a lot. And then 2 to the prior year, 13, so it's declining. The curve is starting to, what? Flatten out on sales increasing, right? But if we just do an average, which I'm not saying that that's the best scenario. We could also do, I like Bronwyn's idea of linear regression. And if I did linear regression, this is not an example of linear regression. This is an example of just dividing it. The average would be 16%. If I did a linear regression, I can tell you it would be less than that. There would be an increase, but it would be less than that, doing an actual, because what? Because the sales increase line is flattening out. And therefore, when it forecasted it, that's what it would do too. But the average is 16%. That is awesome. So we're going to try to figure out how much we're going to estimate their sales are going to be next year. And I'm going to forecast it. If I take the last year, you can see my 628, 467, and just multiply it by 1.16, that would give me a 16% increase. That would make it $729,000. It's a lot, right? It's quite an increase. But I'm also going to add something to it because they had another contract, a big contract, and they really felt like it was going to be big, that it was going to give them a $70,000 of additional income. So I'm going to forecast our sales to be $800,000. What? My cash budget that we're going to prepare for Computer Solutions is going to tell me if I can support that internally. It's really easy to forecast a big sales increase, but can you cash flow it? Right? Does it make sense? And that's what we're going to do. So we have an $800,000 sales plan. The next thing I'm going to do is figure out where's that $800,000 going to come from? When's it going to happen? Because why do I care? I care because I'm not going to wait 12 months to adjust my sales plan, for one thing, right? If my sales plan is now $800,000, but by the first quarter I am not trending well, I'm going to adjust it. I'm going to do whatever. I can't wait a year. But where did I come up with those percentages? Those are the averages that I have used over the last 3 years of this company and where their business fell. Okay? That's key. I'm going to assume that January, February, and March are your lowest months. Yeah. March gets better. Good. Okay. January, February, you could take a cruise, right? You could be. See, I believe you, because in your business that would be the perfect scenario. I would do that. I've never been on a cruise. I think it sounds wonderful. In this particular business, they also were tied to some seasonality where they did a lot. I mean, and in their last month, people were doing a lot of spending. They were trying to flush out budgets, and that happens. A lot of companies may have budgets that if they don't spend it, what happens? You know, they lose it. They don't get a reimbursement for that. They don't get any kudos for saving money. So by gosh, what are we going to do? You bet they're going to lower it, and then so we're not going to allow that to happen. So we're going to spend it. I do the same thing. You know, I'm certainly not going to turn back any grant money. So I'm going to spend it. I'm going to figure out a way, whatever it is, to spend it. And that's what was happening here. You can see February is really their worst month. You know, February is one of those months, man. The only good thing about February was Valentine's Day, I guess. That's what I think. If I was a florist, I guess that would be, February would be good. I don't know who else has a good February. Restaurants. Yeah, you're probably right.
Mother's Day is the number one day for people eating out.
So that's the second Sunday in May, right? Mother's Day.
And then Valentine's is sometimes I'm doing it for restaurants, how they do.
Well, that makes sense,
So,
because I'm not cooking either one of those days. So I'm going to try to avoid it. It's also a short month. I mean, in essence, everybody's losing 3 days of sales, possibly, depending upon where that falls. You could lose 3 days of sales if you're in the retail environment, so it's short. But as you can see, there's you know, while the difference between their best month at 6% and their lowest month at 6% and their best month at 12%, that's double. You know, when you're looking at percentages, it doesn't sound like that much. But wait till we put the numbers to it. Then you'll see, and we're going to do that. So there's our $800,000 sales plan now. So how did I figure that? I want you guys to know. All I've done is taken the $800,000 and multiplied it by the percentage that occurs in that month. And I based that upon historical averages of the seasonality of this particular company. And that's what I would recommend. I mean, the other thing you could do, you could use Bronwyn's more sophisticated suggestion too. You could actually linear regress each month if you really wanted to get, you know.
business school, one of my classmates, she was the accountant for Boeing. And she said that anytime they had a new project that they were considering doing, they did the regression analysis to see, before they bought their first piece of material, anything, to see if they make money on it or not.
Yeah. You didn't get to play cash budgeting model last week, did you? We all know how to do that now. We did a cash budgeting model. Yeah, you missed it. You sorry. Yeah.
But I knew I wanted to come, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
did you get all your things?
Yeah.
Which maybe it was a hindrance, because maybe I relied on it too much, you know?
So we've established our sales plan. What months do you, Diana, do you have revenue in? Because not, just curious.
We have revenue just about every month because of the egg.
Oh,
But then we really will pick up in April when our greens take in. So like March, we'll still have like the cold crops in our food funnel and we'll sell them. It's not like it would be if we were like down at the farmer's market.
yeah. But you start.
And then I sell breads too. But
When do you start farmer's market?
April, the first Saturday in April.
Okay, just curious. They've started them in Springfield. I haven't been yet, I'm just curious. Okay, those are awesome.
April to November.
Okay. Well, then you would show a lot of seasonability in your sales plan.
December to like March.
Okay. So, we've done number one. We've forecasted our sales plan. And that's our starting point to our cash budget, is forecasting how much we think we're going to sell. Now, we're going to look at figuring out when we get the money for what we forecasted we sell. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because it's not going to be as relative, but I want to show you because you guys have different methods and time frames of when you receive money. You're not going to extend anyone any terms, or are you? I mean, if I come and, I come to the farmer's market and you're not going to say, well, Rihanna, pay me next month.
If I really know you, but usually no. Usually some of my, you wouldn't do that.
No.
I have one friend that I do. She doesn't want to write a check each week, so that's fine, so once a month. But my fee for my chicken, she buys eggs, so my fee for my chicken, I decided to get on, their monthly. So when her money comes in, I pay out to the other.
There you go.
So it's just the one person.
Just the one person.
99%.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it.
Farmer's market, no.
Yeah, you guys have a little bit, and a little bit of credit card and a little bit of finance. But I'm going to show you just a couple of methodologies on ideally how you might plan. Because if it's if it affects you from a cash flow angle, you may want to figure that in. So a couple of things. Use historical payments as your guide. How's it going? You could go back, and that's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a little easy way to do it by using a historical payment method. You could also, calculate your monthly days receivable and assume that that's going to continue. Remember, we've calculated that a couple times, and I'm going to show you again how to calculate that. And you can back that in and use that. Or if you have no history whatsoever, you could look at industry averages of how quickly customers typically pay you in that industry. Okay, so here's what we got going. If you want to turn to page 6 in your workbook, I believe, is where we are. 6 or 6, yeah, turn to page 6. Oh, that feels so good, Brahma, thank you. Let me find. Yeah, no, I'm wrong, page 8, right? Yeah, page 8, okay. What this is a historical documentation of what they sold in January of X4. So we're saying that Computer Solutions LLC sold $50,000. That's easy, you can go back if you've identified it. Well, now we want to figure out though is, okay, if I sold $50,000 a month, when did they pay me? Okay, and this is when they paid me. So in other words, what I'm saying is, I sold $50,000. I'm saying that in January, $7,500 of those $50,000 sales in January were cash. $2,500. I've extended terms. $2,500 then came in February, $20 came in March, and $20 came in April. It's what we consider what we call a payment pattern approach, or historically, when do my customers typically pay me? So ideally what I do with this is I just convert it to percentages. So I could use this information for future analysis to try to estimate when I'm going to get paid. It's that simple. And if you have historical documentation, you can go back and look at this, because hopefully you're tracking your receivables. Now, your friend you have one person and she pays you in 30 days and you know how much she buys. And so she would be able to easily put that in her cash budget to know I'm going to sell this, but she's not going to pay me till next month because she doesn't, except once a month because she.
Yeah, it's within the same month.
It's in the same month?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, well. So unless you want a cash budget by week, I would just put it in the same month. Probably don't want a cash budget by week. Probably not necessary because you're not paying the bills by week. You're paying the bills by month again. So mathematically, here's what I would do. I would take the 7,500 and divide it by 50,000, which says 15% of my January sales were paid for in January. 5% were paid in February, 40% were paid in March, and 40% were paid in April. And you guys are probably going, wow, they don't do so good on collecting. Well, remember what was going on? Remember what their days receivable were? About 63 days. That's a lot. And this is kind of what happens. This is kind of what it looks like when you don't have people paying you very quickly. That's a lot of delay. And it affects your cash flow dramatically.
Okay, so how did you get the 15%?
I divided 7,500 into 50,000. And that is 7,500 is 15% of 50,000. And that information, that is in your, if you want to write those in, although you should be showing up on your PowerPoint too in your copy of your slides. That's a payment pattern approach. The other thing you can do is, going back to historicals, look at your accounts receivable, figure, again, the average number of days your customers are taking to pay you. When you're dealing with large amounts of money, this is a good methodology because you can then back that number into and forecast the amount you're going to get paid in the month. So remember how we did it? We take the accounts receivable, multiply by 365, dividing it by sales, gives us the days outstanding. And then that's what it was for 3, and that's what it was for 4. We take the year, the accounts receivable at the end of the year, at that point in time, multiply it by 365, and divide it by sales for the year, the annual sales year. And it was about 62 days. So what you could do, if you're going through a lot, is back that number in and figure out always having 62 days of outstanding. Trying to think through how you guys might, if it's a significant amount of money, you might figure out what percent that typically is of your revenue for the month. And if I was doing a cash budget, then I would take that. I would more do a payment pattern approach probably, since it's not that much of your sales, and reduce that. If I was doing a cash budget, I would move that percentage over to the month in which they typically pay. Do they pay you in 30 days? Okay, well that's good. The other thing that we really haven't talked about is to look at a good record, is to pull an aging report. An aging report, okay, by definition means I'm going to go into my accounting software and I'm going to pull my accounts receivable, and it's usually called an aging report, but basically what it does is it prints out all your receivables by under 30, under 60, under 90, under 120. In other words, it tells you basically the number of days and by the amounts that you have outstanding during those time periods. And that gives you a good clue too. And they could go back and pull that by the months, and that would tell them, and you would know, what that looked like too. Or you could figure out what percent of that was of your sales. If it's affecting your, cash flow, and it is affecting your cash flow.
So with the ratio times 3, does that mean 3 months?
Where's times 3?
Ratio for 3 months, ratio for 4 months?
Oh, that's XX, that's the years. That's just the numbers I'm pulling from the financial statements of the historical years we've used. Sorry, that's confusing. Ratio for, that's that year. Like that would be 2000, say that's 2013, and that's 2014. I'm pulling those actual numbers from the statements that we've used. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. We do that. We did that when we recreated this curriculum so that it's not as dated as, because the reality is if that's, it's hard, you get kind of distracted truthfully by, if it says 2010, you're like, well, that's really old information. Well, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's an example, but it's very hard to get your mind off. Well, we're using really old numbers here, So that's really it.
I saw X's, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
what is multiplying?
No,
If I
oh
see
no.
X, that's what I
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I'm still intrigued about my hospital discovery this morning, about how, like, I had a bad medical, I broke my wrist last year, and so the bill was a lot.
Tell them how you broke your wrist.
I fell off a ladder, getting chicken out of a tree. Anyway, so.
Yeah,
the
I
thing
told her
is,
only in West Plains.
I paid my hospital bill, and like on my invoice, it tells me, it's you owed, so I was called to pay it, and they gave me a 20% discount. And I was like, why? And they said, because you paid it within 28 days. But nowhere did it indicate that I'd have a savings. So like, like if you, go and buy, I don't know, a lawnmower for 10,000, it's a really nice drive or something, like all of a sudden you get a discount if you pay, you don't finance it. I don't know, they probably would compare prices, but I was just like, because when she told me that, I said, you need to advertise that. She's like, oh no. And I'm like,
Which hospital is this?
OMC.
I'll ask them to get first.
Well, you need to talk to them.
So I was shocked. And the other thing too, and the only reason I called them and made payment online is because I had a stack of bills and every bill had a different account number and reference number. So I
Wow.
thought if I'm gonna write one check, well, how am I gonna, have a laundry list of account numbers? And then I thought, well, I'm gonna have to write one check for every single thing. I'm like, that's gonna take forever. So I then just called. And because I called, because that's the other thing. If I would have written a check, I would have written for what was on the statement. I wouldn't have known about the 20% savings. And they would have been getting it by that point. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just like, wow.
Do you guys discount for cash? No? Okay, so if you go over there, they're not going to discount for cash. Just FYI. No cash discounting.
So when I look at QuickBooks and it gives you what your extension, your payment statement is, and it will tell you discount, I'm like, discount, now I know what that means.
That's right. That's what it's meaning.
I'm like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, because it counts discounts and allowances. There is an actual chart. Remember that chart of account stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what it's doing.
No, I don't think discount.
It's 62 days.
Only in volume.
Well, yeah, or maybe consistent, like if you,
Oh,
like
yeah,
for
I do
example,
that.
if someone is going to make a purchase every month for a year, that might
They
be.
get discounted.
So, do you remember what their terms were? Remember from the narrative? Yes, very good. Was. So I'm going to hold them to it. In our cash budget, I'm going to make them collect it in 45 days. And they can. They were just, he was one of the nicest people you've ever met. And he was not good at collecting. So what he needed to do and what he finally did is he turned it over to someone else. He didn't have to be the heavy. That just wasn't his nature, the owner. Some people like that sort of thing, right? In my past life, it was a long time ago, so we had a lot of checks back then. People wrote checks, those things, that occasionally I see someone writing. Seriously, and we had bad checks, checks bounced. And so we had a collection process, and we used off-duty police officers to collect on our checks, and they were very successful. Yeah, and we paid them to basically do that. And yeah, they were pretty good at it. So not everyone is great at that, but it has a lot of value to your cash budget. So I'm gonna force the issue in our cash budget because I will tell you, I know already, if they extend their new sales plan to 62 days, they can't support it internally. I know that. Because most of the time, you can only support about a 3 to 4% sales plan increase internally by profitability is the truth. And there's some fancy-dancy logarithms called the Index of Sustainable Growth that you can actually figure it. It's just really based upon turn and profit margin and owner distribution stuff. It's nothing magical about it, but it gives you an idea. But in generalities, what I can share with you is most companies are not profitable enough that they can support over a 3 to 4% growth out of their cash flow. Why? Because growth eats money. We saw that last week. Remember how much money it was eating? Remember where it was eating money? Because they were growing so much. Remember, now you know kind of why. You're like, now you know their percent of sales growth was so high, they weren't internally supporting it. Remember what they were doing? They were borrowing short term. They were increasing their accounts payable because there was not enough cash being generated in the money, in the company to be able to do that. And that's a very common factor. Preparing a cash budget will elude that problem. At least you will know, is what I would show. You know, that you can't support that kind of growth internally. So we're going to collect half in 30 and half in 60 to make it 45 days because we're going to do our cash budget in an Excel-like format, and we're going to do it by month. So we're going to throw it in the 30-day column, half of it, and in the 60-day column, half of it makes sense, which would average collecting it in 45. I'll go back. Remember, you don't have to do it that way. But what you're telling me, that's probably a good solution for us today. You can figure days and do it, actually get down to the minutia of it. The problem is minutia sometimes takes more effort than maybe the value is. And that's hard for us accountants. It really is. It's hard for me not to get really picky, but the reality is this is a projection. This is a forecast. Hopefully it's a very educated one, but the reality is that's really what it is. So there's nothing wrong with rounding a little bit and lumping things in 30 days and 60 days as getting down to the minutia of doing very complicated formulas. Okay, so now we've estimated receivables. Next, we're going to start figuring out when we spend the money. Monthly expenses, where do we go and look for it? Diana, you can go to your journal, your check register, your QuickBooks. Those are all great places. Using monthly income statements. A couple of things that we want to talk about. We want to talk about the difference between fixed, variable, and accrued expenses. And I know we've touched on that. We touched on it last week a little bit, and the first week a lot more. So it's been a couple of weeks. So let's walk through this again of what this means. Okay. Fixed expenses behave in a way. I think of fixed expenses as those, every month I write the check, same amount. Doesn't really vary no matter if it's February and I only did $10,000 or it was December and I did $20,000. It's pretty much fixed. Things like what? Yeah, you got it. That's exactly right. Variable expenses vary in direct proportion to sales. What's that mean? Variable expenses vary in direct proportion to sales. So, what's a great example of what's your biggest variable expense always? That's right, cost of goods. And that's what you're going to be the most concerned about, getting it right, because it's your biggest and it's your most controllable too, to a point. Because can you raise your pricing? Yeah, you can. Now, you're reluctant to. I know that. That's just how it is. but you can. So variable expenses vary in direct proportion historically. Things like cost of goods, seeds, maybe direct labor. I don't know, you guys may not schedule that way. So what I'm sharing is if you really don't use it as a variable expense, don't project it as a variable expense. Here's an example. If I own a restaurant here in West Plains, restaurants are really good opportunities to have a variable labor cost. Because why? I can have part-time employees, I can send people home early, I can manage to a certain percentage of how much I'm going to spend in labor, and I can control that. But if I'm going to hire, Joe and Susie, and I'm going to guarantee them a certain number of hours, and I'm never going to send them home because I've guaranteed them this, that's not a variable expense. That's not how it's going to operate. So if you don't do that, don't estimate your expense as variable. We have some variable expenses I'm going to show you that we've identified some of them because we've kind of worked through some of the profit and loss the last couple of weeks. Accrued expenses are expenses that what? We've actually accrued the expense, we haven't paid for it yet. So accrued expenses is always something we're going to figure out when we would really pay for it. Things like I had a line of credit and I only pay the interest yearly. I'm actually accruing it. So I'm actually having an expense of the interest, but I haven't paid for it, so I accrue it as a liability. It's kind of the same thing as accounts payable. Someone's giving me terms, but in this case, it's usually taxes. It's usually taxes, accrued expenses. It could be payroll sometimes. For instance, let's say you paid your people monthly, heaven forbid doing that to someone. Brahma and I get paid monthly, that's why we know. It's very difficult. You never feel like you have any money, none, because you get paid once a month, so what do? If you're smart, you pay all your bills, right?
So the moment it comes in,
It's gone.
I called all my utilities, except for a couple ones that aren't flexible. I got all the dates set up to come in just a couple days,
Yep, that's what I do. So, accrued, but if you were a company and you paid your employees once a month,
Is that an accrued expense?
it could be. Bad example. Let me hang out. Let me find a better example. That's confusing. I got a better one. Okay, let's say you collect sales tax, and you do, right? And you only have to pay it when it reaches a certain amount, because that's the sales tax rules, right? So you're accruing that, and you're collecting it, and it's a liability, but it's not due yet. That's an accrued expense.
So you can make money with that, put it on the bank with interest.
Yeah, it's true. That's accrued. Okay. So fixed expenses like rent, your loan payment. Yeah, that a lot of the times that's an amortized amount, right? So you're paying the same amount every month, although it is divided between interest and principal payment. Utilities, maybe not. If I'm a manufacturer, I'm going to describe my utilities as variable. So, it's very dependent upon the type of business. Do you irrigate at all? You drip, huh? So, see, her utility would be variable, by and seasonal, I think. Because in February, it's frozen. You're not using it.
You need for utility.
Yeah, for utility.
We,
Do you have a well? Is it well?
we're well.
Oh,
we have
okay.
a stream,
Great.
so-
Wonderful.
But your electricity would vary.
A little
So,
bit,
like,
probably. Yeah, I don't know how much it varies. I understand. Yeah, well,
higher-
I forget where we are. Wells.
We're not in the city.
We're not in the city. No, we had a well in the city, my dad did. Because why would you pay for water to water the lawn when you had a well? He had our whole outside hooked up to it. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I grew up on a farm. Yeah, I get it.
But if you're in the city, it's exactly,
Yeah.
Your utilities would fall.
You're not going to do that in the city. Hopefully you're not gonna have a water leak in your irrigation system.
Didn't have a what?
We had a water leak in my irrigation system, and it took us forever to find it and figure it out. I have no idea how much money it really cost
Were you
me.
on the ground? Did you put the water system on the ground?
And we couldn't figure it out because we would turn everything off and the meter would quit moving. So we're like, okay, we don't, but I knew we had a water leak because I knew the bill. And finally, my husband was walking outside by one of the irrigation, I don't know, the square things that are in, and he stepped by it and his foot practically went to the center of the earth. And so he knew then where the leak was. So we don't know why it wasn't tripping the meter on the water, but we finally got it fixed. And I got $3 back from the city utilities. $3. I can only imagine how much extra I paid in water. That's how much they estimated it. You know, it's hard to argue with them. So anyway, I got $3. Variable cost, cost of goods, wages, if you're going to do it that way, yay. If you're not, don't do it. Advertising. Advertising is a common variable expense, especially in large businesses. It is not always that way in small businesses. In fact, most small businesses I see will budget an advertising budget, how much they feel like they're going to spend for the year. They may vary it by month, but they have typically figured a fixed amount, is what I'm seeing. Commissions are a great example of variable expenses. Okay, we've done that one. One more, and then we're going to take a break. Operational issues or considerations. Here's some examples. You're going to open a new location. You're going to make a capital investment. You're going to buy something big. You're going to add some new employees. Okay. Those are all considerations that we're going to deal with in doing our cash budget. Okay. We're at a good stopping point if that works. Let's take a little break, and then we're going to create the cash budget. After we create the cash budget, we're going to use it, and then I'm going to teach you one more thing. I'm going to teach you break-even point. I'm going to teach you how to figure your break-even using some of the information that we've used in our cash budget, and I'm going to teach you how you can use that formula to make decisions about spending money. Becomes kind of valuable.